Ladies and gentlemen, my name's Paul, and in this RedGamingTech.com video, we're going to be discussing as well as analysing tech news, which as usual has popped up in the past 24 or so hours. Hopefully, you're having a great day. We have lots of stuff to get through in this video. I want to start things out though with leaks concerning Nvidia's Ampere, because these range of cards are looking to be absolutely crazy powerful. But before we get into the specs, let's set the stage a little bit and kind of figure out what Nvidia need to accomplish with the next generation GPUs. And I think that most of us would agree that there are several criteria that Nvidia need to fulfill. The first is, well, they need to compete against AMD themselves. RDNA 2 will launch later this year. I've heard that it got delayed because of numerous reasons, not least of which is cough, 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 that is, of course, plaguing the world right now. And RDNA 2 is looking to be extremely impressive on multiple levels, not least of which its traditional rasterization performances. Well, good. Let's just say that. Earlier this year, I can't remember if it was January or February, there was a leaked benchmark for virtual reality, and it basically spanked the RTX 2080 Ti. It was around 30% faster than a stock card, and even a heavily overclocked RTX 2080 Ti was outperformed by around 18%, which is very impressive and shows Nvidia need to at least hit those targets to compete with RDNA 2. And remember, those are A, early engineering samples, so clock frequencies are at best not quite there, and B, the drivers were not exactly great. Oh, and C, that benchmark also favors Nvidia. So you can essentially say that they need a target of around 30 to 40% to be competitive. The second thing they need to accomplish is to double down on the features of Turing and improve upon them and entice people who own either Pascal or Turing to upgrade. If you have a card such as the, let's say, GTX 1080, most people would agree that at resolutions of 1080p, 1440p, you're still good to go. The GTX 1080 is starting to struggle in higher refresh rate 1440p now, unless you're willing to make some compromises. But the Ti, my goodness, you're still very good. Then the RTX 20 series, that honestly is starting to come into its own. Despite the fact that it launched late 2018, you can argue that the software ecosystem is only starting to really evolve to fully take advantage of the features of the architecture. Example A is DLSS 2, which I recently covered rather extensively. Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I know that sounds very cliche, but it's really impressive. I honestly had very little in the way of expectation when I kind of launched the application for the first time, because I was almost expecting disappointment. I was kind of expecting it to be a slight improvement over DLSS 1, and I was honestly left extremely surprised. In motion, it's very difficult to discern a native 1080p image from a DLSS 2 upsampled 540p image. There are definitely some, issues here and there, but overall, I am extremely impressed with the GPU. So that brings us on to Nvidia and what they need, what they have to fight off against all of these different problems, and that is, of course, RTX 30, aka Ampere. Moore's Law is dead. Tom actually tagged me in a very interesting set of specifications and rumors that he posted on his YouTube channel. So I will, of course, link his video in the description. And I will also throw in some information that I've been hearing through the grapevine, and a couple of things actually seem to support what he's been saying here. Anyway, starting off with the external features, yes, two 8-pin power connectors on the card. The I/O is exactly what you would expect, several display ports, HDMI 2.1, and a USB-C. And surprising literally everyone in existence. You're going to need to sit down for this one. It's a PCIe 4 interface. Being serious for a moment, yeah, all of that stuff makes total sense. And honestly, I would have been rather shocked if those features were not part of the GPU. But getting into the performance side of the equation, there are 5,376 Cuda Cores present on the full die. This actually has been something that we've seen several times in the past. There have been numerous leaks which seem to paint around the 5,000 mark. Obviously, it depends what they decide to cut the RTX 3080 Ti down to, as this is the full GA102 silicon, but certainly you are looking at the low to mid 5,000 CUDA cores for this GPU, which once again makes awful lots of sense. The engineering sample is around 230 watts at worst, and the card operates at over 2.2 gigahertz when boosting. This also makes sense given what we know the RTX 2080 Ti is capable of. It can routinely hit 1900 megahertz, 2 gigahertz, especially if you start playing around with power limits. So given we're looking at not only an improved architecture, but also vastly improved node as well that's being produced on, yeah, I 100% agree with that. And 18 gigabytes per second memory means that we are looking at 864 gigabytes per second of bandwidth, an increase of 40% over the 2080 Ti. I assume as well that this is going to be further improved with better memory compression and so on, data compression and so on and so on. As for the GA103 and 104, a boost frequency of about 2.5 gigahertz is expected, but this is not confirmed yet. They are still internally testing and validating this. And apparently Nvidia are looking to make sure that 4K is the standard resolution that even the mid-range cards are capable of hitting. As for performance, well, traditional rasterization performance is 40% higher than the 2080 Ti in unfavorable games. And I believe that this figure is 110% plausible. I actually think that this is pretty much expected, because not only is AMD proving that their cards will be capable of this type of performance, once again with that leaked benchmark, but it's also pretty much in line with the general generational leap that Nvidia likes to put out with its big architecture improvements. For example, the 980 to the GTX 1080 was a huge leap in performance, and you can read yourself, according to Tom, we're looking at a 50 to 70% improvement in some select titles. Unfortunately, what features those titles use to really leverage the GPU weren't specified, but I 100% agree that this is more than plausible for a next generation architecture. I don't have any qualms about that. It makes sense given what we've seen from Nvidia on a very consistent basis, generation after generation. What's the killer for me, though, are the ray tracing details, because the number of RT cores in this next generation are not changing. Instead, they can simply process a heck of a lot more intersections, aka more work, compared to Turing, around 4 times. Now, I personally heard a 2 times target quite early on, and I've mentioned this several times on the channel before, that Nvidia are allegedly shooting for at least a 2 times increase, possibly more. So a 4 times increase is certainly very high, but I think given that Nvidia are under a lot of pressure, especially for the next generation consoles, and once again AMD, this figure is kind of what you would expect. I'll get more into that in just a second though, because when you also take into account, according to Tom, the additional SMs, level 2 cache, and also the doubling of the tensor cores, which is something I kind of speculated, because tensor cores are extremely important for things like DLSS, and obviously the more cores you've got, in theory, you can have better accuracy and so on. Theoretically, Ampere should ruffle stomp even the higher end Turing cards if you enable ray tracing, and this will mean that owners of an RTX 2080 Ti could actually get an inferior experience compared to, let's say, a 3070 or a 3060 with ray tracing on, especially if you account for DLSS. While I believe that Tom will have done his best to verify that this individual who has provided him this information will have had access to it, until Nvidia themselves confirm it, of course, you should take this academically and with a pinch of salt. Then again, in the grand scheme of things, I do believe there's a very good likelihood that at least the majority of this information is accurate, particularly when, once again, you factor in things like the current market conditions that Nvidia and AMD will be facing, the fact that the second generation of RDNA 2 will launch later this year, and naturally the fact that games themselves will be heavily pushing things such as hardware-based ray tracing as base functionality thanks to the next generation consoles. It will be extremely interesting though how the next several months goes. Hopefully we will learn much more about Ampere when we see Nvidia's upcoming technology conference, at the very least in terms of the basic architecture of the GPU for the high performance computing segment, and then naturally we can have at least a better understanding of what Nvidia will most likely be doing for the gaming cards. Now, what's really interesting to me about this level 2 cache is multiple times I've stated on the channel that as for RDNA 2, I'm hearing a really big change for the architecture is that the amount of cache on the GPU has increased substantially. And this looks to be one of the ways that both companies are going to be kind of making certain that the performance of their cards are, well, what you would expect. Basically, they're cranking up the amount of cache on board. And yeah, as for the ray tracing performance, I'll also say that one rumor I'm hearing about RDNA 2 is that the performance for ray tracing is between the same as Turing, up to 50% faster than Turing. Unfortunately, I'm being told multiple things from different people. One person quite early on did tell me that AMD was shooting for at least the same performance, around the same performance of Turing. But then someone else more recently has told me that that's not right. That was kind of early silicon, and instead AMD are going for at least a 50% increase over Turing. But obviously that's not the same here as Ampere. Unfortunately, we don't have any leaked benchmarks for the RDNA 2 second generation on its ray tracing performance. AMD did put out that demo, however it was stuttery as hell if you remember. But that could be bad encoding or multiple different factors. What was the silicon it was running on? How optimized was the software? Yada yada yada. So it's very difficult to make an accurate prediction based on actual official information and also leaks. All I can do is say that from what I'm hearing, it's between equal to Turing to 1.5-ish times faster than Turing. I think based upon where the industry is going and also pressure from the next generation consoles, this all makes sense from Nvidia's perspective. Listen, if you're thinking that the next generation consoles, at worst, let's say they're $500, right? Whether it's the PlayStation, whether it's the Xbox, it's irrelevant. Let's just say they're $500. Now, if the performance of these next generation cards are not very impressive, with staggering performance when it comes to ray tracing, really good value for money, which there are a couple of ways they can do that. One, just bring down the price of every single SKU to a more manageable level, or the other option is just to crank the performance up as much as they can, still maximize of course their profits, but make it so even the 3060 and 3070 cards are at least as capable, if not more capable, than what the consoles can achieve. Because otherwise, you could be in this situation where the next generation consoles are just more tempting. But let's just say you have a CPU such as the Ryzen 7 2700, or you've got an older CPU from Intel, let's say an 8700K, an 8600K, that's probably going to be enough for now to still crank out performance, especially if you're overclocking, and then you could pair that with an RTX 3070, do all of the DLSS goodness, and you are good to go. So also, Tom believes that RDNA 2 has massive improvements to machine learning. And what I find really interesting about this is that I've heard similar from a couple of sources. The first is Rogame. Now, he and I DM quite often. He's a very well-known leaker, of course, and from his investigations, he believes that RDNA 2 does have big advancements in machine learning, but he doesn't know the specifics. But someone else who's been feeding me some console-related information, I don't want to go too much into this because it's an upcoming video, has also told me very similar. They hinted that both consoles have benefited very heavily from RDNA 2's machine learning capabilities, and obviously we've kind of learnt some of this for the next generation Xbox as well, and how that GPU is going to be capable of doing some really awesome stuff. Not only with AI upsampling, but HDRing. That's not a technical term, but it's just fun to say. Older generation games, and just, it looks really impressive. So I believe that it's a very good bet that the next generation of RDNA does feature a really, really robust performance when it comes to machine learning. And now let's switch on to some console stuff, because there have been a couple of very interesting updates. The PlayStation 5 and Xbox are rumoured to launch in October, kind of. So let's start with the PlayStation, because it's first alphabetically. The rumour for the PlayStation release date being in October, although there wasn't a specific day, first emerged because of a Twitter user, Nibel. And basically, he discovered a job listing which indicated that the PlayStation 5 would launch in some point in October. And this job listing, however, was then commented on by Sony Interactive, who issued a statement to Famitsu. And they said that it was an, quote, error by the recruitment site. So, I mean, technically speaking, if they accidentally leaked the release date of the PlayStation 5 in being in October, yeah, that would be an error. But whether that actually is what they meant, or whether the PlayStation 5 is going to be released in, let's say, November, who knows? I mean, personally, I think October is like the earliest we're going to see the next generation consoles. And I believe that October, November are the most likely months, because obviously in December it's a bit too close to the Christmas period. So I believe that some point late October, some point early November makes sense. And of course, November was also the release date for the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. So I suspect that that type of time frame is going to remain consistent from one generation to the next. Well, a moment ago I said that the Xbox has also potentially had its release date leaked, and it is October 23rd. And there are a couple of sources of this. Now, if you recall to the Inside Xbox event, which of course took place last week, one of the games that was shown, and I personally think it looked really cool, although I'm yet to play any of the games in the series, was Yakuza Like a Dragon, which honestly looked absolutely zany. And during the event, we learned that, well, I'll read it verbatim. Yakuza Like a Dragon, an explosive new entry point to the acclaimed Yakuza series, will be releasing as a launch title on the next generation Xbox Series X, with a simultaneous release on the X1 and Windows 10. So what is the source of the leak? Well, if you recall, during the Inside Xbox event, we learnt that Yakuza Like a Dragon would be launching day one on the Xbox Series X. And then there was also a post on Xbox Wire that said Yakuza Like a Dragon would be released as a launch title on the next generation Xbox Series X, and also see a simultaneous release on the X1 and the Windows 10 PC. And we are also excited to announce that Like a Dragon will support Xbox Series X smart delivery immediately on release. That means if you purchase the X1 version of Yakuza, you'll be entitled to a free upgrade to the Xbox Series X version. Cross-save functionality is also supported, so no matter when you decide to upgrade to the Series X, you'll never have to start over from scratch. So at the very least, according to Microsoft anyway, the game and the Xbox Series X should launch at basically the same date. But there's a Finnish retailer which has listed the game to launch on October 23rd. Now, there is the possibility that the retailer in question has gotten the date wrong. It's placeholder, But according to reports around the internet, it seems like in general, this retailer does not use placeholder dates and would only put titles up for pre-order once they have actually received official confirmation from the publisher. So, from all accounts right now anyway, the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series X have a very good chance of both launching in late October. I think that late October to mid-November are most likely the dates that we're going to see these particular consoles launch. Unfortunately, things like launch titles, pricing, well, we still don't know that stuff, but at least we have an idea now about the release window. Anyway, hopefully you have enjoyed the video. The normal stuff if you did. Like, share, comment and subscribe. And I'll see you soon. Take care of yourselves. Bye for now.